What's up, guys? Mike the Cop. Police officers have a stressful job, a potentially dangerous job, and we're going to talk about that today. But as I was reviewing for this, I definitely am glad that I have no shot at ever being the president, because those guys probably have the most stressful and the deadliest job in the country. I mean, check out the before and after pictures of George Bush, of Bill Clinton, Obama, oh my goodness, and even Trump. Just kidding. He was definitely better than the alternative.
I got you. Yeah, I will defend my brothers. I will defend the weak. I will pursue and fight evil so others may sleep. I am the sheepdog, protecting the night. Wolf hunters unite. Bring it on. It's time to fight.
All right, guys, in all seriousness, politics aside, just having some fun with that, there are unique stresses to being a police officer that non-cops, I think, should be aware of, and police officers need to be reminded of so that they know how to deal with that stress appropriately. I want to be really, really clear up front that I am not asserting, never have, never will, that cops are for any reason better than any other citizen of this country or your respective countries where you police at. However, the job does bring with it some unique stresses that may or may not be found in other careers. First responders generally will have a lot of the similar stresses to think through, whether it's firefighters or EMTs, even doctors and nurses serving in the traumatic injury capacity. There is absolutely no way I could have one video that just covers everything about stress in general. And I have heard a bunch of times in comments like, oh, you always talk about the dangers of policing, but there's so many other jobs that are more deadly. And yeah, you're right. I mean, you could be a logger. I looked at Huffington Post from an article in 2017 that listed the top 10 most deadly professions. Logging workers, fishing and related fishing workers, aircraft pilots, roofers, structural iron and steel workers. This one blew my mind. Refuse and recyclable material collectors. So the garbage man lives on the edge. Electrical power line installers, drivers and sales workers and truck drivers, farmers, ranchers, agricultural managers, and number 10, construction laborers. All those are very dangerous jobs, statistically speaking, and definitely the President of the United States, 9% chance of being assassinated. That is not good. And another reality is that more officers die from self-inflicted wounds, suicide, than they do in line of duty deaths. This all relates to stress. So I'm going to just share quickly with you an article that I had written before, and it's 5 stresses that police officers experience, that cops experience and have, that non-cops should be understanding and cops need to be reminded of so that they deal with it appropriately. First thing is a daily preparation for battle. Now, I know we're not always having to go into the fight, but we always have to be ready. I mean, we put on bulletproof vests, ballistic vests, and have guns on our hips for a reason, not because we want to be in a situation where we're having to use our vest or we're having to use that sidearm, but because we may need to for ourselves, for others in our community. This is something that can create a stress, obviously. And again, maybe you're an accountant at a high level stress and you're worried about your pencils breaking, or you can't stop thinking about work and numbers, or you have multi-million-dollar contracts on your back, and that creates a stress too. But there is a certain stress that is created from every day being at that locker, getting ready, putting that vest on, that you have to have a mindset that says, I have to be ready for that kind of encounter. Number 2 is hypervigilance. This job is going to change you. It's going to change the way that you see risk, the way that you see potential situations, encounters. When you see the world from that angle, it tends to have an impact on the way that you see other everyday situations. You don't sit down at a restaurant the same. You don't drive the same. You start seeing things that you may not have otherwise seen. And that awareness, just like number 1, that daily preparation for battle, that carries into other parts of your life. And so you're constantly aware of what's going on. It's very hard to just relax and not have that mindset. And it's going to change you as a police officer. It does happen. And that hypervigilance will wear on you if you don't have healthy outlets to deal with it. Next one is life in a fishbowl. In 2018, more than ever, body cams, dash cams, citizen cams, news cams, it's everywhere. There is a massive amount, contrary to popular opinion and belief, there is a massive amount of pressure and oversight in the field of law enforcement. We are being looked at and scrutinized more than ever. And it's something that not a lot of people understand unless you have that experience. Most people don't go to work, even if your job is dangerous, even way more statistically so than police officers. There is still a sense of not necessarily being scrutinized so heavily and so constantly as in this field. And that can also be something that creates a stress on officers. Next one, and I think this one is super important, if not the most important one for non-cops to understand. And that is that as police officers, we sit on the front row of despair. Typically, people aren't calling the police when their day is going very well. They call very likely in a terrible or possibly the worst moment or situation of their life. And police officers are constantly having that type of scenario put in front of them. And that can take a toll. A lot of times people are like, I waved at a cop and he wasn't smiling at me, or the cop was real short with me when he pulled me over. One thing I want to understand, and this is not an excuse for a cop mistreating someone or speaking rudely to someone. I'm not excusing that. They need to be able to deal appropriately with these stresses and handle themselves with professionalism, even in the face of these stresses. But think about this. Think about a police officer who, first thing in the morning, has to go deal with a death in a family. Then a couple of hours later, they tried to perform CPR on an infant and the infant didn't make it. And then the next hour, that's your encounter with them. And maybe you're making a report about a missing article from work or a stolen bicycle. And so in the mind of the officer, they're comparing a stolen bicycle with a dead child that they weren't able to revive in a situation. And you're like, well, he didn't seem to care too much about my problem. It may not be that they didn't care. It just may be that what they've dealt with is a lot heavier than what that situation presented to them now is. So there's a lot going on in the day-to-day life of an officer that may impact their stress levels and how they come across. And again, that's not an excuse, but it's something that I think that if there was one thing that I would think would help change the perception between law enforcement and the community where it's not accurate or it's poor or there's a problem, that would be one good step for the non-cop side to understand about what we're going through. And that, again, it's not an excuse for what the cops need to understand about your situation or an excuse for unprofessionalism, but it's something that I think we need to come together on. And lastly, related to these is riding an incident roller coaster. Police work is 90% stationary and 10% action. So one moment you're leaving lunch, eating a couple of tacos, and the next moment you're in a knockdown, drag-out fight with someone who broke into a house and ran away, and you've got to subdue them. It's completely unpredictable in that sense, and you're constantly up and down, and that does have an effect on adrenaline dumps and other aspects of having that high stress, low stress, high activity, low activity in an unpredictable pattern. And police officers need to train and be prepared for that. All these things combined create not more important stresses than anyone else who's not a cop, not more dangerous things, but it creates unique situations and stresses that I think that people need to understand. And if you're a police officer, you need to be reminded of these stresses so that you're handling them appropriately. This is one of the key things that we do in our call for backup suicide prevention training through Humanizing the Badge is we talk about stress fitness, how to manage stress in healthy ways, not destructive ways, not ways that are going to have a negative impact on those that you're dealing with in your job as a law enforcement officer or a first responder, but ways that help free that stress from your life, or they're mitigated in good ways, healthy ways. And so for more information, you can always check out humanizingthebadge.com or call the number 4 backup.info. If you're stressed out and you're having a hard time coping with some of these things, please reach out. Don't let it get any further. Don't let it get any worse. Don't know how this video will turn out editing-wise. That's up to the underpaid producer, but thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. Drop any follow-up questions or concerns in the comments, and I will see you out there.